Hello, everybody, and welcome to ABL Down at the Farm, episode 10, where we talk about all things prospecting, but particularly prospecting the ABL, a 30-team dynasty league, with a glorious 20 spots for each team for prospects for a total of 600 prospects, which certainly gives us a lot to talk about. And tonight, I'm privileged to be able to talk about that with Mark, who's the owner of the Cleveland Guardians, who is in the thick of the playoff hunt in the American League Central and the American League generally. So without further ado, I'm going to bring in my AL owner, friend, and colleague, Mark. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Steve. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining. And I'm particularly grateful that you're joining from work at the end of a long day.
Yes.
This is true dedication to the league and the show. I appreciate that. And we'll try not to keep you out too long, but you're staying after hours. I see you got your sport coat in the corner, which is,
Yeah.
of a real person's job. Now that I'm at Google, I get to wear t-shirts and jeans to work every day. So I'm transitioning to a different world that I'm accustomed to
Yeah.
being in. But it's nice to be out of that. But I still respect and recall the
Yeah. I
days.
took off the tie though. It's over. It's around
Good.
somewhere. So.
Yeah, this is definitely a non-tie show. Definitely.
Yeah.
I got my Jordan Walker T-shirt on, and I got my Cardinals hat.
You're
So
a little bit more casual than I am.
yeah, a little bit more casual on ABL Down on the Farm. So listen, it's great to have you on the show. We got a lot to cover tonight. And as I often do with first-time guests, I just wanted to go over kind of your dynasty league experience, how long you've been doing it, how many leagues you're in now, and what I'm always particularly interested in knowing is how your thinking has evolved about prospects over time. The more of these kind of leagues that you've been in, and later in the show, we'll definitely get into your ABL situation right now, which is very much a win now kind of like situation for you because your team's terrific. You're like right in the thick of things. And that's exciting. But I know it's cost you some prospects along the way to make trades,
Yes.
including a little trade you and I just made before the deadline. And at the end of the show, we'll talk about crushes and fades, which is my favorite aspect of the show. But tell me a little bit about your Dynasty League experience and kind of like what your experience has been onboarding into the ABL.
So really, I'm pretty new to Dynasty itself. I was more of a keeper league guy.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I don't know if you saw. I guess it was Alan's one of the first episodes I was on with him. I went into some detail about my history, but I've been playing fantasy baseball since I would say the early '80s. We had I don't know if you're familiar with score sheet baseball.
Oh yes.
Okay, so I started doing that, and back then it was all by mail.
Yep.
There wasn't internet. We'd have to mail in our draft sheet. We'd have to mail in our roster changes, and then we would receive the results back via mail, which seems really weird now, but that's the way it was. And then of course, score sheet evolved into online. So I've been playing, I guess, for roughly 30 years now. Is that right? No, probably more than that, 35 years. And that was a keeper style league. You keep 13 players. Everybody goes back into the pool except for rookies. You can keep as many rookies as you want, but they take up a roster slot.
Right.
And all that. So it was, I guess, close to Dynasty, but not quite. You really didn't want to keep a whole lot of rookies, a whole lot of prospects, just because it took up a roster spot that you could use for a veteran that you might need. So I've done that, and then I've done some basic roto stuff. Redraft roto with a group of friends here in Dallas area, and we'd meet. That was always fun. We'd have the auction in person, at somebody's house or apartment, and that was always a blast. But those were redraft leagues, so there was really no interest in prospects then.
Yeah.
For those type of leagues, and then I started reading more about the dynasty leagues on the football side of things, really. But then I saw, I guess, the ABL post in Reddit, I want to say, is where I found it.
Mm-hmm.
And so ABL is really my first experience with Dynasty. And then I'm also in the ARL, which started this year. and then I still have one score sheet league going. So,
Is that right?
Yeah. So 3 leagues is all I'm doing.
So just let's pause there for a second on the score sheet league. Is that something you've been involved with since the early '80s? That particular league, or has this just been an additional league you got involved with over time?
This league that I'm in now, I've been in for about 10 years. It's been
Okay,
but that league has been in existence for maybe 20 or so years. But
that's amazing.
no, when I started in score sheet, it was all the very first ones weren't even keeper leagues. They were just redraft type leagues.
Yep.
And then I met a group here in town, the same group that I do the roto stuff with, and they were in score sheet. We did in-person draft for score sheets, as well as the keeper structure that they have. Did that for many years. But no, the league I'm in now is called the Fisk League.
Okay.
Carlton, after Carlton Fisk.
I get it.
Yeah.
I'm originally from Boston, so
Okay.
I know all about Carlton Fisk, Pudge, the original Pudge, and
Yes.
I have seen that Game 6 home run highlight many, many, many times.
Yeah. So I've been in that one for about a decade now. I was competitive the very first year. I finished second, and then I had about 5 or 6 competitive years, and then I kind of blew it up about 3 years ago. And right now I've got a huge prospect farm, but my major league team is horrible.
It can be shallow, but we'll talk about the time where you have like real great major league rosters and you're trying to keep your minor league system intact, which is ABL right now for you, I think.
Yes.
So you got a little bit of both worlds going on, it sounds
Yeah.
like. But before we delve into your kind of onboarding into Dynasty, I remember when I started playing fantasy baseball back in about 1987. So a little bit after the time period that you're talking about. I had a home league with some friends, and I remember having a draft where we had like a legal pad, and you wrote down your draft picks and like your roster, right?
Yeah.
And you'd go to USA Today and their little sport, and you calculate the standings on your own. The commissioner would be responsible for calculating the standings every day. This is before anybody had the internet.
Yeah. Or laptops.
Yeah, right. Or laptops, or like websites that would like do all this stuff for you. All right.
Exactly.
But I also recall getting involved in national leagues where you'd have to mail in your draft picks and also have snail mail discussions about trades.
Oh yeah.
Right. You'd write letters to dudes like and try to get them to trade players.
On score sheet, they would actually print your phone numbers if you
right.
I'd be calling these guys up and we'd be talking trades on the phone.
Yeah.
Just like a real GM would be doing, I guess.
Exactly. Now we have like instant message and different ways to do it. But yes, I recall those days. It was fun.
Yeah,
it was a lot of fun. So let's talk a little bit about getting into ABL because this is very interesting. I mean, getting into ABL for Dynasty is kind of like jumping right into the deep end, right? If that's your first onboarding into it, you went right from basically like swimming in pools to swimming into shark infested waters and like not just like blue sharks or something but like white sharks, like big sharks, right? You went down to Australia to the Barrier Reef and you're swimming with like some like very experienced Dynasty owners. How has that been for you, and how have you kind of approached prospecting as somebody who's new to this kind of, I mean, you're not new to fantasy baseball and you're not new to prospects, but it is a different flavor of ice cream that you're involved in. How are you navigating that?
So really the transition wasn't that bad from score sheet keeper style to Dynasty. I mean, I still had my, I guess, finger on the pulse of prospecting with the keeper leagues because you did want to keep a certain number. You're not keeping 20 like you do here, but you would keep a fair amount. But yeah, this is definitely a great group. There's a great group of prospectors here, and it's definitely upped my game, helped me study more, pay more attention to things that I never used to. I mean, I always had a philosophy of win now, even in the keeper leagues. Win now, win now, win now. But when I started my first year, and I know you came on in the middle of that first year, right?
Yep, that's right.
Baltimore. So you probably remember I had one win that first year.
Yep.
And my philosophy was to go young, go youth movement. I also took a lot of aging vets. I had Syndergaard, I had Strasburg, or Strasburg, and who else did I have? I took a bunch of flyers on guys that were high risk, high reward, but could just bust out completely, and most of them did. That's why I only won one game. So.
Right.
But I was able to flip all of those for more prospects, more picks, and then that's kind of, I think, the impetus for a lot of the rule changes in ABL over the last couple of years to prevent owner from making those type of moves, the dumping early. I dumped, I think, in May of that year. There was no restrictions on it at that point, so why not? I wasn't going anywhere. I had one win, and half my team was injured, so let's blow it up. And it worked out because I used most of those assets that I acquired in the first year to build a really good team last year that went all the way to the World Series. And I've continued that to some degree this year in the off season. I had Ellie De La Cruz at one time. I had Ezekiel Tovar.
Yep.
Robert Hassel. I made a list the other day. There was a bunch that I was like, oh my, I had all these guys. I'm like,
No, I wasn't kidding. Like you really sold out in a lot of ways because you did have a very, very stacked system.
I had Drew Gilbert.
Yep.
Who else did I have? I had a bunch of really young, exciting players, but at the same time, my philosophy has always been that their assets and their, chips to use to get a bigger piece or a win now piece. And I'm kind of in that mode right now. I might pay for it down the road. That's yet to be seen, but flags fly forever. And
that's true. They do, don't they?
Yeah. Even though Josh doesn't recognize an AL pennant, I don't know.
Josh, the Giants owner, right? Yeah, who was on the show earlier this year, and Josh has similarly this year gone all in and traded away a lot of prospects. So it'll be interesting to see how that pans out. I mean, there is always an advantage to stacking up your team, but it's like Mike Tyson said, everybody has a plan until somebody gets punched in the face.
That's right.
Like you just never know what's going to happen in a head-to-head series, and sometimes it just takes one injury to derail you.
Yep. A couple bad starts. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you just never know, right? So there is real risk in doing that.
I mean, we give Joe a lot of grief over his coin flip comments, but I mean, it truly is in the playoffs. It could be, you want to build the best team, and Duke's done that the last 2 years, and they can withstand some of those setbacks better than others. But
right.
But still, there's a lot of this is one and done, and there's no second chance if you have all 7 of your starters have average starts or below average starts. But
right. And so Joe, for the audience who maybe not be ABL oriented, because I do have some people who watch the show from outside the ABL. Joe owns the Dodgers and has often said that the playoffs in a head-to-head league system is a coin flip. And you're right. There has been a lot of banter on the Banter channel about that, and whether that's true or not. And you did mention Duke, so that's another reference to the godfather of the ABL. He usually gets mentioned at least once on the show. He was on episode 1. He is the defending back-to-back champion of the league, but he just himself had a dump proclamation, and it appears, at least superficially, to think he's not going to have a chance to win the league this year. So we may, emphasis on the word may, have a new champion for the first time. Somebody other than Duke may win the league, and maybe that'll be you.
Yeah, well, I hope, but I don't see how anybody's beating Josh right now. But like you said, you just never know. One bad week.
Yeah, absolutely. You just never know. I'm last year I lost Max Scherzer right in round 1.
Yeah.
And that certainly derailed my team. I don't know. I don't know where I would have finished, but you get the point.
Yeah, just look where Brendan and I have been back and forth. This week he would have beat me by 40 or 50 points. Last week I beat him by 60 or 70 points. The week before I think he would have beaten it. We look to be on a collision course. No offense to David, owner of the Athletics. I think he's going to be right in there too, or any of the other teams for that matter. But we look to be on a collision course for that ALCS, and it really will be a coin flip. Who has?
It'll be matchup based, right?
Yeah.
Like how your pitchers match up that week to their opponents, and
Yeah.
just who's hot and who's not.
Exactly.
And Brendan definitely has a great team. He's the Royals owner, and
Yeah.
you guys have been in a dogfight in the Central all year long, and last year too. It's actually one of the great ABL rivalries at the major league level. So let's talk about prospecting in that context. And the one thing I want to, before we transition to your kind of win now mentality as it implicates your ABL minor league roster, is I wanted to just pick up on one thing you said about the additional research or learning that you've had since becoming an ABL owner and how it's upped your game. What kind of resources have you been gravitating to? Like, in what ways have you kind of upped your game or like gotten smarter, if you will, about prospects?
I try to diversify it. I try to spread it out. I don't really focus on one or two people, because then you kind of get into an echo chamber at that point.
Uh-huh.
There are some that I prefer over others. Jeff Ponce is one, just top of head. I really, anytime he says something about a prospect, I listen, I perk up.
What is it about him that makes you feel that way?
I think it's because he actually scouts. He's not. While I like the data-driven approach too, I think the fact that he gets his eyes on these kids and can actually speak intelligently about what he's seen. I put a lot of faith in that. But when I say I diversify, I do. I look at the data-driven lists and people. I don't know if you're familiar with PAR's list. Have you seen that one before?
Yes, I have.
Yeah.
I don't follow it closely, but I know of it.
Yeah, and Scout the Stat Line. There's a ton of resources out there that do data-driven prospect rankings or commentary, and a lot of that stuff's pretty accurate. When you look back on it, and they picked out some kid that 4 months ago nobody heard of, and then all of a sudden he's a top 200 guy and shooting up the rankings or whatever. And I know you're not a big ranking guy, which I'm kind of on the fence with that. I like to look at them. I like to kind of bounce things off of those rankings and at least consider them. But at the same time, I definitely look at the data driven. I like to look at what the scouts are saying. And all the big names out there that most people gravitate to, but I really like to spread it out. I have a Twitter list, fantasy baseball, and it's stock full of prospect guys and just general baseball guys too. But a lot of prospect guys there, and they'll link to other prospect guys, and I'll go check them out and see what they have to say. And I think the big gotcha there is you can't. So if I have 2 or 3 prospects on my team, and I see this guy pumping up those 2 or 3 prospects, I can't just start falling in love with what that guy's saying just because he likes the same guys I do. All of a sudden, you can't fall into that trap. But at the same time, you definitely like to get multiple input. I don't want to hear from just one guy saying, "Oh yeah, this guy's the next big thing." I go out and I say, "Okay, let me see what this next big thing's been doing. Let me see what else other people are saying about this next big thing before I make any." I spend that $1 precious fab on that prospect.
Yeah, whether it's $50 or $25 or whatever, or $1,000, right? It's all relative. It's interesting. I also like a marriage of scouting and data-driven analysis, and I think each one of us has different calculus in terms of how we balance that. But I do place a lot of value on the opinions of scouts I respect or publications I respect who actually go out and scout players and have multiple scouting reports on the same players and keep, basically a running diary, if you will, on them, which, can evolve over time, and that picks up interesting observations about different approaches the prospect's taking, pitch mix changes, swing changes, as it may be, different hitting approach changes. And they can often be really invaluable because you can get ahead of the data In other words, the change may not be reflected in the data yet, but maybe it's coming,
Yeah.
right? And if you wait too long for the data to catch up with the change, you might miss out on getting the
Yep.
prospect,
They're gone.
right?
They're long gone.
Yeah. So I mean, because we're playing with a bunch of very well informed owners in ABL, and I think this is true for a lot of the more competitive dynasty league teams, or dynasty leagues, I should say.
Sure.
Where we basically have a ton of information available to us. Twitter's, as you mentioned, is a source of a lot of information.
Hmm.
Some of it good, some of it not so good. um, but we all kind of pick the people we like to follow, and we kind of trust them to varying degrees. But you know, I think there's something to be said for developing a system that enables you to be nimble and to pivot between data and scouting.
Yeah.
And during the course of the year, I don't know how you found it to be, but the scouting is a little slower to come out in terms of publications, in terms of people releasing a new scouting report, because by its nature, it requires somebody to actually lay eyes on a kid. And usually once is not enough to be meaningful,
Nope.
right? So you might get a scouting report, for example, at the beginning of the year on a prospect you like, whoever that is, and it gets you excited. But then you're waiting until at least probably mid-season before you get another meaningful scouting report on them, right? And then end of the year, maybe another one, so maybe three you're getting on the kid. And so, what do you do in the course of the year? And that's when I turn to the data,
Yeah.
right? And that's what does the data show me? And also, go ahead. I've been
It kind
talking.
of works. It kind of works the other way sometimes. You were talking about how the scouts can be ahead of the data sometimes, but sometimes the data can pick up on things that the scouts aren't seeing yet,
Yep.
and maybe even the box score is not seeing yet. Because that's the other problem with relying on certain scouts out there. Sometimes they scout with the box score, and they're looking at the numbers, and that's where they're making their opinions from. Whereas the data is the data, and if there's some really smart people out there putting together formulas and models that project these things, and a lot of it's been pretty accurate to some degree. Another good follow is sometimes these beat writers or guys that follow the minor league teams, double A, triple A, whatever the case may be, that's their focus, that's their thing. They're at all the games. They're getting eyes on these kids every night.
Yep.
And following those guys can really, or at least just checking in with those guys every once in a while can produce some nuggets.
That's absolutely, yeah, I agree with you 100%. There's some beat writers who particularly see the minor league games in particular. Who I really love to get the insights from, like, oh, I saw this kid, he's really hitting the ball hard, right? And then you can go look at the kid's data and say, like, all right, what's his isolated power? What how's he making contact? How's it look? Is it showing up in games? And start to fill in the the pieces to determine whether you want to pick up the kid or not, right? And then maybe like a week later, you're still on the fence, but you hear another beat writer say something about the kid, or maybe somebody national says something about him, right? And you're like, all right, now I got to pick him up, right? Because now everybody and the mother's going to be in on this kid, right? So yeah, it's interesting, to me, marrying the data with the scouting. And has that changed or evolved for you at all? Because I don't know the extent to which you were really engaged in scouting or data before you got into ABL, because maybe you didn't have to.
Yeah, before ABL, it was more, the mainstream guys, because you were looking at top 100 lists.
Yep.
Or even top 50 lists at that point. And of course, it's just the industry itself has evolved so much in the last several years. 10 years ago, you were lucky to get, a top 25 out of somebody, or you might get top 5 from each team or something like that if you were lucky in the back of a magazine that was printed 2 months ago. So now, I mean, as the industry has evolved, I'm trying to, I guess, keep pace with it. But yes, it definitely changed when I got into the ABL, because you're looking at much deeper level of prospecting. top 500 list sometimes aren't even enough. Not some of the really pop up guys might not even be on 500 yet. So you even have to go deeper than that. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely changed since joining the ABL and ARL. We have 5 more prospects that we can roster. So it's, but there's only 24 teams, so it's probably works out to about the same number actually. But
Right.
still pretty deep. So you definitely have to keep digging. It's always it's always a process, and can't always dedicate much time to it either.
Well, life does get in the way, right? I mean, there's this thing called life, right? And some of us have spouses and family,
Yes.
And they require attention. So we all understand that game. And those things are obviously more important. Well, good. Let's delve into some of your roster decisions that you've had to make this year, Mark, because as the ticker says, you're all in, baby. You're trying to win, right? You were in the World Series last year, so you've got a very good team, and you have a very good team this year. But when I was preparing for the show tonight, I was looking at your minor league system, and you actually have quite a number of very interesting prospects on your roster that some people may not have heard of. All right, but I know them. And I mean, some of those guys, I'm interested to hear about how you came across them and why you decided to pick them up. Because you got names on here that what I would characterize as like, I wouldn't say yesterday's news because that's too harsh.
Yeah.
But guys who have been around and maybe a little of the luster has come off of. And then those guys that I'm thinking of are, guys like, Greg Jones, the Tampa Bay Rays, who you got on your roster. Okay, like most prospectors have heard of Greg Jones, and he was kind of a guy who was exciting, and maybe he's a little less exciting, but you have him on your roster, and I get that. In the league this deep, having a guy like Greg Jones makes perfect sense. But you got other dudes here, including some guys that I've had on my roster in ABL at one point, but cut, who you picked up, who I'm interested in hearing about. And so I was just going to pick a couple at random. And what I'm interested to hear you address is the extent to which you pick up these guys to monetize, to make a trade now, to win, versus, thinking, this is a kid I might actually want to hold on to. Right. And because you have a win now mentality. And so there's a balance, I would assume, correct me if I'm wrong, between, collecting pieces just to flip them, but all versus collecting pieces because, I got a plan for the future in some respect.
Yes.
Right. So, I'll just name a couple guys, and I'm interested to hear your thinking about how you came across the guy to the extent you remember, and kind of, was it win now? I want to trade this kid, or is it like no, actually this kid I like a little bit. So one of them, who you got early in the game, who's very popular right now, is Sebastian Walcott.
Yes.
And so, how did you first learn about Sebastian? And have you been hit up for him in trades? I assume you have, and you resisted trading him. So I'm interested to hear your philosophy on a guy like that.
Yeah, I've had a few trade offers for him. So I'm here in Dallas. I'm a Texas Ranger fan, so obviously, very in tune with what they're doing. But I want to say with Walcott, I heard on a podcast his name come up because they're talking the international class. All the big names were listed off. But then, some of the guys have these names that are, what they call it, their long shot or their upside guys.
Yep.
It was probably a Prospect. It was probably a Prospect Live podcast, but I really can't remember who it was that mentioned him. So I started studying him. I looked at him. I found a few other guys out there that were high on him, thinking that he could be better than what his ranking at the moment was going to be. And so, yeah, I tried to get him everywhere I could. In fact, I have him in all 3 of my leagues, I believe, right now.
All right. So, he's a guy you're in on.
Yeah, I'm pretty high on him.
Yeah, or we refer to he's one of my guys, right?
Yes,
it's kind of like Goodfellas. Or he's one of our guys, right? Or actually, That's Donnie Brasco. I
Yeah.
make my mafia movies.
See, the thing you got to know about me is that I'm not married to anybody. Nobody is ever untouchable on my roster. There's going to be some players that are going to cost probably more than you're willing to spend for them, but
Yep.
but there's a price for every player on my team. I'm not one of these guys that's going to say, untouchable.
No, look, I think it's an important point, Frank, in dynasty leagues and in prospecting generally. It is an ability to fall in love with your guys to the point where you become unreasonable. And even I have traded Yuri Perez.
Yeah.
So I mean, there. I have one league where I traded him. There's nobody who's untouchable. I agree with you. There are some guys who I like so much more than consensus that it'd be very hard to pry from my dead hand.
Yes.
But I think that's the right mentality to have in dynasty. You have to be willing to pull the trigger, particularly in your situation,
Yes.
where you have a team that can win now. And that's a delicate balancing act, I think, in terms of recognizing from your vast fantasy baseball experience when you have a team that can win now,
Yes.
right? Because you can draw on a lot of experience in making that determination, versus like understanding I'm really giving up the farm for a speculative chance to win, right? And so, for example, in my team in ABL this year, given the injuries I had, I took my foot off the gas. I would describe it. Basically, started repositioning my team for next year, right?
Sure. Yep.
So I was in kind of more acquisition mode, but I think in your situation, really being open to trading those guys is healthy. And I just kind of put a thumb on the scale, if you will, like of my prospects. I was like, all right, well, yeah, I'm willing to trade these guys, but like it's going to cost you even more maybe because I'm not in the mood, right? But I'm glad you said that because I think that's right. So Walcott's one of your dudes, and I get that. But it also sounds, correct me if I'm wrong, that you kind of base that on scouting more than data at the time, because maybe it was really early in the process.
Yeah, my initial interest was scouting on him, and pretty much I would say my entire journey with him was mostly scouting and what the people that had eyes on him were seeing, because there wasn't a lot of data. You don't get a lot of data on the international guys anyway.
Nope.
You really have to rely on scouting, but that is such a gold mine, the international pool.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, I mean, I still am pissed off that Jeff got Ethan Salas right before I was about to pick. He was top of my queue. I thought I had him. Everybody was passing on him. I had a mid-second round pick, and I'm like, damn, this guy's falling. And then Jeff takes him. I'm like, oh, shit.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a good example. I mean, Ethan Salas was very high on my draft board too.
Yeah.
I ended up taking not Noah Schultz, my other league. I took who did I get at 20? Oh, Dylan Lesko. I traded up to get Dylan Lesko in ABL, who I like very much. But I had Dylan Lesko in my top 5 on my board, but Salas was like pretty high up on my board.
Yeah.
And so he was one of the dudes that I passed on when I traded up to get Dylan Lesko in this year's draft. And when he fell to Jeff in the second round, I too was angry. And he's turned out to be fantastic as a young kid who's in at a level way beyond his years, and he's acquitting himself quite nicely. But you're right, the international pool, I think, presents an opportunity for really shrewd owners who really value scouting to take advantage and to get decent prospects on their roster who then break out in the data and become monetized in trade discussions.
Yep.
Right. And you're able to flip some of these kids. So with that in mind, you have a couple of other guys who kind of fall into that bucket that I wanted to ask you about and how you came across them. And again, is this win now versus, win later kind of mentality when you pick them up? And another kid who I have in a couple of leagues, and I noticed when you picked him up because he was on my watch list, was Yofari Rodriguez of the Milwaukee Brewers.
Yeah.
So talk to me a little bit about him and, what you recall your thinking was when you picked him up off the wire.
Yeah, really, I was, I think I had just made a trade and I had a couple of spots open, and I just went and did a research crunch, went out there, a lot in Twitter, a lot in some of my other resources, and his name, and there's somebody else I picked up at the same time. I think he's here. Let me pull up my roster too real quick. Cole Soriano.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah.
I think I got both of those. I got both of those at the same time. But I want to say where I first heard their name was from a data-driven source that had like 10 names. I want to say Ryan Clifford was on there.
Oh sure, yeah.
And a few other names that popped mid-year. But those two were still available in the ABL, and I was like, well, I got 2 spots. There's nobody else really on my radar right now. Let me just throw $1 at each of them and roster them. And I think it's pretty common strategy for most dynasty owners to churn and burn those last few spots. But yeah, I'm going to keep my eye on them. They definitely look the part. They definitely are putting up some numbers. See where it goes. But this time next year, I could be flipping them for. They could be a top 100, top 150 guy, and I'm flipping to make another run, or I'm holding them and because I'm rebooting. So.
Yeah. I mean, but he's a nice little chip to have, right? Because
exactly.
I think he's one of these data darlings that is starting to get like high exit velocities. He's got a good walk rate. His hit tool seems to be holding up pretty well in his first season in the DSL. He's an interesting prospect for the Brewers. Definitely on my radar screen. I have him in a couple leagues. And we'll talk a little bit later in the show about the trade that you and I made right before the deadline in ABL, where I got Luis Baez from you for Raziel Iglesias on an expiring contract, which certainly is going to help you down the stretch, and good luck. But we'll talk about Baez. But the other guy I almost asked you for was Rodriguez.
Oh yeah.
And I'm happy to tell you like why I chose Baez instead, but like we'll get to that.
I would have probably given you Rodriguez over Baez. I think Baez is the better right now anyway.
Right. So we have a similar mindset as to it. But I do like both players. And it was kind of an interesting decision point for me. And, we can get into that, like how I did that calculus in my head. Another guy that is very interesting to me on your team because he's been in a lot of lists recently, and he's in a lot of these data articles who were looking at, OPS, ISO, contact rates, is Wellbeing Francisca of the Cleveland Indians, who's a shortstop.
Yep.
Okay. And he's certainly a kid that I have been following for a long time. And, candidly, I have passed on him in all my leagues. And the reason I have is because he's short and he's small. He's 148 pounds.
Yep.
Right. Now he's only 17 years old. Maybe he'll have a growth spurt. All right. But I am very wary of kids who are under 6 feet and under 150 pounds. And so I'm wondering what your thinking was when you picked him up, because he's definitely got the numbers. He's having a great season in the DSL, and the kid can clearly make contact and hit. I just worry, when he gets to upper level competition, whether that's going to carry forward in terms of his power ability, his ability to really compete against upper level athletes. But I'm interested in hearing what your thoughts are about him and why you picked him up.
Yeah, I'm pretty much like you when it comes to looking at physical characteristics. I'm not the Jose Altuve. That body type is very rare. It's very rarely successful.
Altuve's a unicorn.
Exactly. I want to say I heard about him not too long after I learned about Walcott. I don't think it was the same show, but it was around that same time. So I did some digging, and I watched his first couple of months and tracked his numbers. But coming into this season, my farm system was pretty depleted to begin with. I think my best prospect maybe coming in after I made it that Drew Gilbert and all those trades to start the season was Jonathan Clase. And of course he skyrocketed at the start of the season. and I flipped him at some point. I want to say, who did I get for him? I can't even remember now.
There's so many trades in the ABL.
But he was my best prospect coming into the season, so I was just really looking for some names that were going to pop and had some upside. And I did get some offers for Francisca
Mm-hmm.
back in the early part of the season. Um, yeah, it's his hype has kind of died down. Probably could have sold back then higher than I could now, but he's a guy I want to see. I've got him in a couple of leagues also, and my score sheet league he's in, and definitely I want to monitor. But yeah, I'm kind of with you as far as the size things go. That does concern me. But we'll see once he gets bumped up a level. I'll monitor him closely, and if he
Yep.
is able to produce at a higher level, then I might have something there. But if not,
Yeah.
I'll dump him, churn and burn.
Yep. No, I hear you. I hear you. No, he's definitely a guy to keep an eye on for sure. He's lighting up the DSL. He has been having a great year. You got another guy, Luis Lara, who kind of is a similar story. And he's another kid. He's a Milwaukee prospect, for those who don't know. Kind of a line drive hitter, interesting kid. Got some hype early in the season, a lot of publications, and certainly had a nice start to the season. A little bit older. He's 18. As opposed to some of the 17-year-olds we've been talking about. And one guy, before we talk about Luis Baez, who you traded to me, is Lonnie White of the Pirates. So Lonnie is a kid that I drafted when he was coming out. In his first year, he was eligible to be drafted in a lot of leagues. And in ABL, I actually traded for him with Jeff, and then I cut him. And so, you've got him kind of on the rebound. So he's kind of like a post-hype prospect in a lot of ways. But in fairness, he's never really been able to have a full season yet.
Yeah.
A lot of injuries for this kid. So, I saw when you picked him up, I noticed that. And I'm wondering, what made you gravitate to Lonnie White? Was there something you saw, something you read that you say, I'm going to give this kid a chance?
Yeah, he's the opposite of Welbin Francisco. He's got the physical tools. He's football player in high school, college, and he's just got the physical characteristics that you think could blossom one day. Now we've seen hundreds of those kids flame out, and very well could happen with Lonnie White. But again, I think I picked him up. He was on the waiver wire, and I picked him up at the same time that I was picking up a lot of just flyers. He started out, he was injured, and he came back from injury and was pretty pathetic. And he was close to being burned at that point with me, but he's picked it up recently. But he's still young enough. I think I want to give him a little bit more time. Now, obviously, if I need to make room at some point and need that spot, he's probably not in my last spot. Probably Reginald Preciado is right now.
I hear you.
But he's another guy that I just can't quit, because he's got the physical tools. And he's been injured. So I kind of want to see what he looks like when he comes back. But yeah, I want to give Lonnie a little run just to see what he can do. Hopefully get the bump in level, and we can really see if his swing and miss issues are going to plague him throughout, or if he's going to actually figure it out at some point. He's that good of an athlete that I think he could, but that's the fun of it, I guess.
It is the fun of it, right? I mean, you do all this research and this work, and you kind of and we'll talk a little bit about this more about your roster, because when you're going for it as you are, right, you kind of have a luxury with prospects that folks who are in my position, for example, and are trying to reload or retool for future years don't have. You can clear roster spots for these kids and take flyers on them. And if it doesn't work out, it's not a big deal. You'll backload it with another kid, right? So, in a lot of ways, you have the luxury of rostering a kid like Lonnie White and seeing what happens right now. Because, you've got a bunch of guys who are in some ways fungible, and I don't mean that in a pejorative way. You can just cut one and pick up the X, whatever suits you at the moment, right? And so Lonnie White probably falls into that bucket. Whereas some of the other kids we've been talking about, you're like, well, I actually like this kid. You got one other guy that I want to talk to you about because I just picked him up in one league. Is Jorge Barosa.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he's had a great year. He's a AAA, and maybe he's on the precipice of going to the majors, which in the ABL actually has a lot of value, right? Because he could be a cheap major league player for you.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I just want to talk to you about him and how you got onto him.
I think I've had him probably longer than most on that in my minors. I want to say I picked him up in the off season or maybe late in the season last year. But yeah, similar story. Just reading through multiple sources, name pops up. I do a little bit more study, investigate, look at the numbers, and then if I have a spot I can churn, I'll grab them. But I really don't remember too much of the backstory on him because he's a little bit further back. But
that's fine. He's a golden oldie.
Yeah, but I'm betting it was probably similar to Francisca and Walcott, and that I heard his name on a podcast, and then you start diving in at that point, and
yep.
And I like him. I think, like you said, getting those guys that can come up early in the majors and stick. I mean, that's gold in this league if you can get somebody that's productive. I think my biggest pickup this year though was Mickey Moniak.
Right.
I got him for $1, and he's been, pretty much in my starting lineup almost every day when he's playing. Now he's kind of cooled off since his hot start with the Angels, but
he's provided value in this league. Yes.
Talk about a post type sleeper, and he qualifies all three positions, so I can keep him next year $3, even if he's a platoon guy. $3 platoon guy, all three positions. I'll take it every day. So.
Yeah, absolutely, and those guys count, right? Those post type sleepers, right? So that's interesting. One other question about your roster, and then we'll talk about our trade, if that's all right with you. So the other question I had is, I noticed you got one pitcher. So you got 19 hitters and one pitcher. What's going on, brother?
So, yes, I'm a big 10-step guy.
Yeah. And for those who don't know, that means there's no such thing as a pitching prospect.
Yes. I'm a really big believer, and I always have been, and I'm probably pulling back the curtain too much here on my philosophies, but I just think you can get pitchers, especially hot prospect pitchers, a little bit later on. Mm-hmm. When they're 26, 27, 28 even. I mean, there's just so many examples out there of pitchers that bloom late or figure it out later. Now, there's tons of examples of hot young pitchers too. Don't get me wrong.
Yep.
But I think trying to, and maybe it's just a failing that I have, trying to figure out which ones those are is not something I've been very successful with. So I tend to shy away from them. I did have Yu-Min Lin before I traded him away. And I think I did pretty well identifying that one, but because I think he'll be pretty good. But again, you just never know. There's just so many examples of top pitch. I mean, just look at this year. Tiedemann and Tink Hintz had some struggles.
When Andrew Painter's been hurt. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, Painter, Daniel Espino. For every one that's really had a good, good success in the majors, you can find one or two that haven't. Where I think it's easier to, yeah. I think it's easier to identify hitting prospects than pitching prospects. The bottom line for me, I think Duke's really good at identifying pitching prospects. You as well, but that's probably a weakness of mine. So I tend to shy away from that and focus more on the hitters. But yeah, every once in a while I'll read up and I'll get a tip or whatever on a pitcher, and I'll investigate and take a flyer there. But you look in ARL, I think I have maybe 2 or 3 pitching prospects, and we get 25 over there. So
Right. And look, you're not alone. I think a lot of dynasty owners share your kind of perspective on pitching prospects. I know
Mhm.
Jeff and I have talked about this many times, and he's kind of more in your camp than mine. He's not as starkly different. He has more pitching prospects than you do, but um, I think he's echoed a lot of the sentiments that you just expressed, and other owners who've come on the show have as well. I certainly take some pride in being able to identify pitching prospects. They certainly do not all work out, but there are metrics I look at. I talked a little bit about it on the last podcast, but there are scouting reports I look to, sources I look to really discern which pitchers to pick up. But it is a crapshoot, and as I've said on other shows, I think really the trick is the acquisition cost.
Yeah.
And is it $1 of fab, or are you expending a first round or second round draft pick on them?
Yeah.
Right. Or are you giving up real value in a trade for a pitching prospect? And I tend to hedge the risk that you identified by using a low acquisition cost.
Yeah.
And if I'm able to do that, I'm willing to trust the sources that I have and the data that I rely on to roster them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there is an advantage to rostering a 55 grade pitcher, for example, over a 50 grade hitter, if the acquisition cost is right.
Well, it's definitely a lot of value, because I think in ABL, pitching is a premium, and if you can get a $1, $3, $5 pitcher that you can keep for 6 years very cheaply, it sure beats going out and paying $29 for Sandy Alcantara, and
Right.
or even you look at all the injuries to pitchers this year. I mean, in the ARL, the other league, I traded a whole bunch of assets to pick up Joe Musgrove. 1 week later, he goes down. Who knows if he's back in time for the playoffs? So you just never know with pitchers. They do seem to be a little more fragile than hitters too. So you have that. The Tommy John risk is very real. Take McClanahan, for example. I mean, that's just horrible news for him today. Brendan has him for $7, or I think $7.
Something around there.
Yeah, very cheap. And, I'm sure he was hoping to have him for the next 4 or 5 years at a very reasonable cost, where I would have to go out and buy, all these other pitchers.
I know.
I mean, you saw what I spent for Brandon Woodruff and Kyle Wright, and I had maybe 1 week of them.
Yeah, right. And that's a testament to you for still being in it.
Yeah.
You're still competing, right?
Yeah.
Look, one of the interesting things, and we'll get to the trade that we made right before the deadline, because I do want to talk about that at least a little bit before we get to crushes and fades, that I observed about your roster, right, is that despite the fact that you are really going for it and are really in year 2 of going for it, you actually have some very interesting prospects, as we talked about, on your roster. And I think that's a testament to being a very shrewd dynasty owner in a very, very little experience for you. So dynasty. So it reflects really well on you. I was preparing for the show. I was like, oh, darn, he actually has some good prospects on his team. I was like, I kind of want these guys. And, I think that's terrific that you've been able to backfill. And I don't mean that in a bad way, your roster with guys who are very attractive, after dealing away some really high value assets. And I think that's a good testament to how to effectively win now and build for the future at the same time. So that's one of the reasons I asked you to come on the show, is I think it's really a testament to some skill you picked up in a very short amount of time. And maybe that's a reflection on your, fantasy baseball skill doing it for so long.
Yeah.
Right. But I think it's a different translation when you get into the minor leagues, and you've also taken some risks with some very young prospects. And being willing to dive in on them. People are not always eager to get 17-year-olds from the DSL, or whatever the case is, and you kind of see how you're able to monetize them, and also maybe strike gold. I mean, maybe one of them is the next Ellie David Cruz, or whomever, right? Jackson Churio, all of whom came up through the DSL, right? So good for you. And let's talk a little bit about the deal you and I made right at the deadline, which just happened. We just had our deadline at ABL.
We did it like 4 minutes before, 3 minutes.
Yeah, right before. You and I were going back and forth. All right, so I put Iglesias on the block. I had him on an expiring contract. $15 expires this year. Obviously, very solid closer in the league and has value for a team right now. And I got a lot of interest in him when I put him on the block, and so I originally asked you for a second round draft pick.
Mm-hmm.
All right, a 2024 draft pick. You countered with a 2025 second round draft pick.
Yep.
Right, and so which I understood. All right, and so I countered and said, well, I'll take one of your firsts in 2025 if you want to do that. And you said no.
I've got 3 of them. So.
Yeah, you do. You have 3 of them. So, and I said, take your pick, whichever one you want to give me, right? So I was like, I don't care. And so my thinking in that was like, look, I was basically trying to even out the value, the present value of a 2024 second round pick versus the 2025 1-year delayed gratification of a first round draft pick.
Yeah.
Right. Because from my perspective, there's real value. Well, let me put it this way: there's present value in owning a prospect sooner rather than later, right?
Yeah.
Versus the uncertainty of who that prospect will be 2 years from now. Because it is all about getting guys to the majors at the end of the day, right? And so a guy I pick in 2024 gets to the majors presumably faster than a guy I take in 2025. So I want more skill. I want a higher ranked prospect. So that's why I asked. So first you said no, which I got. I was like, fine. So then we had kind of this, game of chicken, right? Like we had like, I was like, all right, I'll do the second round draft pick, and you were thinking about it, right? And about 6 minutes before the deadline, I offered you that trade, right? And then I was looking at your roster, and I saw you had Luis Baez on your roster, and he's a kid that I like. He's in the Astros system. And the Astros have a very long track record of successfully identifying and cultivating prospects through the DSL, the J15 process. And so he's a kid I've been watching for a while. He was owned in every dynasty league I'm in. I still been tracking his stats, and he's done very, very well at the complex this year, where he spent most of his time at the beginning, at least at the beginning of the year. And, he had 21% walk rate, 18% strikeout rate, was just crushing the ball. He had a 390 ISO at the complex, right? Now he's got promoted since then. He's in A-ball now at 19, which I like, right? 19-year-old in A-ball. He's 6'1", 205, which is kind of a nice frame for a hitter.
Yep.
Right. I mean, it's kind of the metrics you want to see, as opposed to Francesca, we were talking about earlier, 148. Like, 6'1", 205, I'll take that. Right. I'm like, that interests me. Right. Now, look, his numbers have, kind of predictably not been as strong in A-ball. Right. He's, 10% walk rate, 22% strikeout rate. So kind of flipped. And, his ISO's down to 131, but he's still kind of holding his own at 19. Right. Yep. So he was a kid I was willing to make the deal for. My thinking was, gee, he's kind of like second roundish value to me in a draft next year. So I thought I was getting the equivalent of what I might ask you for. Maybe he's the third round draft pick next year if he was in the pool, right? But he's an A-ball now at 19, so that maybe it evens out, right? So I'm wondering what your philosophy was when you saw, because you basically immediately accepted the offer when I made that as the fallback offer. So what was your thinking on that deal?
Well, let me just start from the beginning, because, at the start of the year, I had Edwin Diaz, Ryan Presley, and Jose Leclerc. So I thought I had 3 closers going into the year. Well, we know what happened to Diaz, and Leclerc's his stint as closer was short-lived. So I had Ryan Presley for pretty much the majority of the year as my only closer. And I got to looking at other rosters, and especially Josh, he has 3 closers. I think Duke has 2 closers, all in the top 10 or top 12 closers. And I was like, I really need to get a closer. And I talked to Brendan, because Brendan was thinking about dumping at one point, which I don't understand, but we went back and forth. He was trying to shop Snail, and he was trying to shop, and I can't even think of his closer now. Anyway, Devin Williams.
Uh-huh.
So I was trying to get him, and he was interested in Walcott. I was like, well, I probably need a little bit more, or let's flesh this out. But he wanted to make this.
I'm interested in getting a date with Angelina Jolie.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
But I was willing to discuss Walcott with him, and we were pretty close. But he was waiting for the snail deal to go through, and it never went through. And then I guess he woke up and realized that he does have a chance to win the AL, a very good chance. And blowing it up right now is not the smartest thing to do. So anyway, so that's why I posted. I guess I posted maybe with 2 hours to go, 3 hours to go till the trade deadline that I needed a closer. And Tyler responded immediately with a couple of his guys, and one of them I was somewhat interested in. And then you posted that you were shopping Iglesias. So I was like, okay, well, that sounds good. But the reason I was held up on the second rounder from Washington is because they're going to be a lottery team most likely. And we saw last year that lottery pick can be anywhere from 1 to 16. It really doesn't matter, it seems like. So I'm thinking I could be potentially giving up a top 30, 30 to 35 pick here if the ball falls right. So I was really reluctant to do that for a rental. Because we've got 2 weeks left in the season, and then the 5 weeks of playoffs.
Yep.
So I was going back and forth. So when you sent over the Baez deal, whereas I like Baez just as much as you do, it sounds like. I guess in my mind, like you said, he's more of that second to third rounds range. It could be anywhere from mid-second to maybe mid-third. I felt that the Washington pick was just a little more valuable than that, and I would be willing to give up that piece. And like I said, since then, I've seen him ranked in the top 60 or 70 with some rankings. And I'm like, oh, God, what did I do?
Yeah. I mean, we were kibitzing about this even before the show. I think he's popular right now. I think some of his StatCast data is coming out. People are kind of high on him.
Yeah.
We'll see. We'll see how they feel after he struggles a little bit more at A-ball. I am cautiously optimistic about him, but I think this deal, and the reason I wanted to delve into it a little bit more is that to me it kind of highlights an effective win-win trade by two people in different positions, right? So I gave you something you needed now that I could part with, and we figured out value that basically kind of like was a fair compromise where the two of us were, right? Yeah. And I think that's what it's about, in terms of building a fantasy dynasty roster and making trades generally in fantasy baseball. And maybe that's a testament that we've both been doing this for a while, and we're able to get a deal done, which I'm happy about. And good luck with Iglesias down the stretch. He's a terrific closer for the Braves. They seem to be pretty good. And by the way, Brendan's other closer is Munoz now because they traded Seawald, right. So he backed into another closer. So his team's solid.
His team's good. I don't know why he even considered it, but I think Musgrove and McClanahan were down at the same time, and he just figured, but he's got 7 other starters, I think 7 or 8 other starters, and
and Lance Lynn, who he has, is coming on.
So and his offense has been super solid all year. So,
he's got a terrific team. He definitely does.
I definitely don't think I have this thing sewn up by any stretch. I mean, he beat me this past week. I think David beat me this past week too. I think I finished 3rd in AL.
David's strong.
He's always got a team too. Yeah, he's got a good team. I think somebody, might have been Adam, said at one point that if David would ever focus on our league, we'd be all in trouble because this is like his 3rd league and he didn't pay much attention to it. And he still has a great team every year.
Yeah, he's shrewd. He was on the show earlier this year. He was terrific. I'm always angling. I think I have him slated to be on the show later in September.
Oh, good. Which I missed the first one. I have to go back and watch that.
So let's transition because I do want to talk about crushes and fades a little bit. And we've talked a lot about guys you like who are on your roster, and
Mhm.
This part of the show, I basically try to focus on dudes that you like maybe a little bit more than consensus, or that you're fading more relative to consensus. And I'm just wondering what prospects come to mind for you when you think about that.
Yeah, on the fade side of things, the first name that comes to my mind is Ronnie Mauricio. I traded him early in the year, I guess, but he had a great Dominican League season.
Yep.
Yeah, was it Dominican League or Mexican League? He had a great winter league season, and then he was tearing it up in spring training, and he was tearing it up and he's still doing well in the. He hasn't really tailed off any, but I I see him, and I could be wrong, but I see him as a 4A player. I think he'll come up when he does come up, and he's going to struggle against major league hitting, and he'll probably bounce around for a few years. I think he'll be a serviceable major league player, and definitely somebody that you'll want to keep on your roster at the back end for those days when your stars have days off, that type of guy. But yeah, I'm not as high as most experts and most rankings show him to be. Other fades, you know, I probably would have said at this point Jason Dominguez, but I'm starting to come a little around on him. So I'm probably still a little lower than what you would see in consensus wise on him.
What's made you start to come around on him?
Well, just a lot of the data. I mean,
yeah,
his walk rate's always been strong, but yeah, I mean, just the batted ball data is really sticking in there and improving. And he's still so young.
Yeah,
he's still really young. Is he going to be the guy they thought he was back, when he came out? I don't think so. But
the next Mickey Mantle.
Yeah, I don't see that.
High bar.
Exactly. But I definitely see an everyday major leaguer now in him. So I've kind of backed off of that fade. Crushes. Let me think of some crushes. I mean, most of the crushes are on my list, but some of that I didn't get, like Ethan Salas and Ryan Clifford. I do like Roman Anthony. I know Josh would love to hear that. Trying to think of a few others, but yeah, there's a lot really. if we had 100-man,
I know, right?
I could fill it up easily, but I'm trying to think of somebody really deep that I've been.
Let's just pause. Let's pause before you do somebody else on Roman Anthony for a hot second.
Okay.
I like Roman Anthony too. All right. And I know Josh loves him. And for those who aren't in the ABL, it's the owner of the Giants. He was on earlier in the year as well. And he's also going to be on.
He's going to be on. Fan, so he loves Roman
Anthony. Yeah, he loves Roman Anthony, right? So, and I get it, but Roman is an interesting guy because he's now played at both A ball and high A ball this year, and he's 19 years old, so it's age appropriate. Everything's fine. But in high A, he's got a 31% strikeout rate, right? Still a huge walk rate, 18%. So he's an interesting dude, right? In A ball, he had an ISO under 100, but he now has a 326 ISO. So like I can't figure the kid out yet. I mean, but he's interesting, and the thing that really strikes me is the scouting reports on him. And I don't know to the extent that you've looked at that, but people just gush about his swing. Like that, every scouting report on him just talks about how perfect his swing is. And that's always been the thing that has stuck out to me.
Yeah, the thing I look at more, especially at his age, is that walk rate versus the strikeout rate. I know you don't want to see 30s ever, but when you have a walk rate as high as he does, I think I've seen, or at least maybe I don't track the data myself, but it just seems like more often than not that strikeout rate does come down over time as they mature. More so than if they had a 31 and a 4 or 31 and an 8. Um, so the walk rate's really important to me, but yeah, that ISO is just insane.
It really is.
So yeah, right now he is a crush. I know I'm not ever going to get him in the ABL, but with Josh
I
around.
don't think anybody is.
But you never know with Josh. Sometimes he'll change on a player, and then all of a sudden he's giving him away for peanuts, and you're like, what happened?
Yeah, we try not to wake Josh up when he's in that mood.
Exactly. Exactly. But yeah, I like him. I think yeah, I've listened to the scouts too, and yeah, he's somebody I tried to get in my score sheet league, but Walcott and him were there at the same time, and I went Walcott, and hoping that come back around to me I could get Anthony, but he was gone. So
right.
So I've only got him, or I don't have him in any leagues really. I didn't get him in ARL either. So, but yeah, it's somebody I like. That's a crush right now. Man, just trying to think of any other deeper ones. I really like another guy on my list that you didn't mention early is Jason Morabel. Yeah, I like him a lot. I think. I mean, you look at his numbers. I think he's going to be very. And again, could be a little bit of homerism there since I have him, but
nothing wrong with that, man.
Yeah, I really like him, and if he's available in anybody else's league, I would recommend going out and grabbing him. And then the ones that we mentioned earlier, Rodriguez and Soriano, definitely go grab those guys. Just
Yeah, I think Rodriguez is a guy that is a perfect example of somebody you can monetize in 6 months, right? And maybe he's going to be more than that, the guy you want to keep, but like he's one of those kids that is all of a sudden going to be on breakout lists and top 200, top 150 lists, and people are going to be like, oh, who is this dude? Like, oh, Mark has him. Maybe I'll talk to Mark about him, right? And before you know it, you'll be getting a major leaguer for him, right? So. I think part of the game with the DSL prospects is identifying those dudes now, rostering them for nothing, and then flipping them, right? So that's what we're all trying to do.
See, my score sheet league, it's open universe, so I can theoretically go out and draft a 16-year-old high schooler that Ethan Holiday was taken a long time ago.
Right. You mean Jackson Holiday?
No, Ethan.
Ethan Holiday. I say.
Yeah, isn't that the brother's name? Ethan, I think it is.
I don't even know.
Yeah, I think he's a 2025 draft prospect, and I've got 3 first rounders, so I'm hoping he's supposed to be the number 1 guy in 2025. So.
I see. So I don't start scouting these kids until they get into the pipeline, the year of the draft, because it's just too much can change to me.
Well, I mean, if you ask me who my ultimate crush is, it's Jackson Holiday, which is okay. Yeah, he's the number 1 guy. Of course he is, but I've been on him since before our FYPD. I thought he was better than Drew Jones. I liked him better than all the rest, Hermar, everybody. I felt he should be number 1 overall. Of course, I'm still on him, but that's kind of how I got on Ethan Holiday too. I was like, oh, there's a brother. Maybe I got a chance.
Right.
Yeah, love the bloodlines thing.
I was going to say the bloodlines are good.
Love Matt Holiday.
Well, I got a guy on the Rangers with good bloodlines. His name is Pablo Guerrero.
Yeah. I saw him and picked him up too because I was thinking about him.
So he's he just turned 17 in the DSL. He started the season at age 16. His numbers aren't flying off the page, but I've read really good scouting reports on him, and this kind of the Statcast data is there. So it'd be interesting to see what he does. He's young relative to the competition he's playing against in the DSL. So he's the guy I'm interested to see what happens.
Yeah,
he's a Ranger.
I might have beat you to him if I'd had an open spot, but I'd heard I might have read the same thing you read, but I want to say it was just a tweet that somebody tweeted, go out and get him. Usually I don't.
We did read the same tweet.
Yeah, I usually don't react to those unless I have an open spot to just burn. But I was full at the time, and I was like, well, I want to wait and see a little bit more than just one random guy. I don't know if it was a random guy. I can't remember who it was that tweeted that, but.
My recollection is there's a couple of Rangers beat writers that I follow,
Yeah.
And my recollection is that one of them tweeted about him, and I just also read about him in Baseball America.
Okay.
So the combination of those two things, he
Yeah.
was on my watch list already. And when I saw the tweet, after having read about him in Baseball America, and I had an open slot, I was like, all right,
Yeah.
like I put a dollar claim in for him.
Yeah,
So.
you were probably ahead of me on that one. I think first I mean, I was aware of him just being a Ranger, and I'd heard his name before, but nothing, no really hype around it. Nobody's really talking about him. Then I saw that tweet, and I was like, oh, better keep an eye on this guy. And then all of a sudden, boom, you've got him. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
well,
Yeah,
scratch
well,
another one off the list.
right, right. There's a lot of sharks in the ABL.
It really is.
Yeah. Well, listen, Mark. You've been very gracious to stay on the show late into the evening, where after work, where you are, and I really appreciate it. This has been really a lot of fun,
Yeah.
and I think we all benefited from the wisdom of all your experience. It's rare that I'm on with somebody who's been playing fantasy baseball longer than I have, so
Yeah.
I appreciate that. And hope to have you on again. And best of luck. Beating Brendan and winning the league. We need some American League representation in the World Series that can actually do the job.
Yeah.
So I'll be rooting for you.
It's gonna be a tough job because either Joe or Josh are going to be, and Jeff for that matter. They've been 1, 2, 3 all year. It seems like.
Yep. No, they're stacked. They're stacked.
Yeah,
It's gonna be good competition, but it just takes a couple good weeks to win the title. So
that's right. That's right.
good luck. And for everybody else watching at home, remember to ABP. Always be prospecting.
All right.
Talk to you later.